of how you're doing and how it's working in Fort Wayne and in the world. Thanks for being here. I'm John Dickmeyer. This has been Potpourri.
Access Fort Wayne offers reflections of our community. Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne are a service of the Allen County Public Library. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting organizations. For more information about creating your own television program with Access Fort Wayne, call 421-1250.
Hello, I'm John Dickmeyer. Welcome to Potpourri. I'm here with my lovely co-hostess, Randi Ginder.
Hi, John.
Hello, Randi. And I'm also here with our guest, Terry Doran. And Terry is going to talk to us about TRACK, T-R-A-C-K. And we're not going to tell them what that is right up front, but we're going to ease into it and develop the topic. So, Terry, tell me your interest. What moved you on the right track?
On the right track. Well, we have you to thank for the name TRACK, you and Bob Hunter, who's doing camera today, as we ease into the explanation of what it is. Well, TRACK has to do with abused children. Not entirely. It will be open to all kids, but there's a focus on abused children. I had a rough childhood growing up with a mother that was less than fond of her children, shall we say. And my brother took his life about 10 years ago, directly as a result of the abuse he suffered growing up. And it continues to be abuse, a tremendous problem, tremendous in a bad sense. In the United States, we have the highest rate of child abuse of any industrialized country. We have children going hungry, and what sparked the most recent spark was the tragic, horrible death of that little girl in the trailer court, Allie Lemon, which naturally a lot of people were terribly upset, and a lot of people have done different things, balloon launches, and there's I think a garden memorial at her school, Holland Elementary. But that's sort of what started it specifically. And along with her, there's 3 or 4 other very high profile child abuse cases in Fort Wayne that had received national attention. The most famous probably is April Tinsley, which was back in the 80s. I think on April 1st, I think it was April, I'm not sure of the day, but I know it was back in the 80s. That crime has never been solved. She just disappeared not too far here from the library, about, I don't know, maybe no more than a mile on up Webster Street in that area. And then more recently, there was a couple other children who died horrendous deaths. So that kind of started it, and what can we do, and talking to different people, and We've done a lot of different shows. You've been part of them. Patty Hunter is doing audio, Bob Hunter, a lot of people. We've been doing shows to raise awareness, generate interest. We've had an original song performed, original dance performed. We've had a young lady that you met she was giving a speech at a public function, and she came on one of our shows, and the News Sentinel saw the worth in her story of how she overcame abuse growing up, and goes out into schools and does talks, and she said that kids, she's just overwhelmed by the response because she tells her story, she shares her story, which helps her deal with it. And then these kids come up and say, oh my gosh, I've had similar things happen to me, or I'm having them happen. Who can I talk to? So all that sort of grew into what started to be a children's museum. We called it Children's Museum. Then John talked to some people, and they said, well, that's a good idea, but it doesn't quite seem to be what you're doing. You know, Children's Museum brings up the image of all kinds of exhibits, and we're not really doing that, although who knows, it might evolve into some things like that. But we're seeing it more as artists volunteering their time, and there may well be exhibits come out of that, you know, artworks, painting walls, making paintings, sculptures, songs, who knows what all will come out of it. And John came up with the idea, well, Three Rivers, I forget exactly, it was a little bit wordy, but he said it was a little bit wordy, and then Bob condensed it. So I'll let you say what TRAC stands for then.
Well, TRAC stands for Three Rivers Art Center for Kids, and it's an interesting concept, I think, because the arts are what I call the window to the soul. And a lot of healing goes on that way. We can backtrack a little bit. I suspect that the abuse and neglect is the root cause for a lot of the problems that we have in our community. And a lot of the focus in recent days has been on gun violence, but there's also other crime connected. And I sincerely believe that child abuse in and of itself is a crime, although it may not be perceived as such by a lot of people. But when you lay your hands in a violent way on another person, or you use your words in a violent way towards another person, that's abuse. And when it's done to children, it's particularly difficult and problematical, because I believe that children are sponges, that they absorb everything that adults and other children say to them.
I totally agree, and the effect is lasting. I mean, it's not like my brother who took his life. I mean, it seeps into your very soul, you know, and it lasts forever. And you spend your lifetime trying to overcome it, deal with it, and your point is very good, John, that this leads to a lot of crime because people who are abused have so much anger and so many unresolved issues, and that will come out, if not with their own children, then in gangs and things like that. Violence is a way of having power, of making yourself feel powerful. Certainly gun violence makes somebody feel powerful to have a gun. But an adult hitting a child is a perverted form of power, but nonetheless power, because who's helpless? A child. You know, they can't go anywhere, they don't have ways to fight back, and of course you internalize it and think, well, if my mom or dad is saying these bad things or hitting me, there must be some reason. You know, we had a show John attended with 5 therapists who will be part of TRAC and volunteer their time, and they talked about the various forms, and I was glad to hear you say not just hitting, but the words, because that's what we had, was words more than being hit. But boy, when you're a boy and your mother is just telling you how horrible and rotten, repulsive, you know, it just gets into your brain. And of course, the treatment of being fed and things like that wasn't so good either. But anyway, this is all what started it, and what we're trying to do. And I've been really happy with all the people that have come out to be part of TRAC or support it. I mean, there's a long list of names, so I won't try to name them all, so I'll leave some out. Malaya Heck was the young lady that spoke, that I talked about, that's in the News Sentinel, that the News Sentinel did a story. And the mayor, Tom Henry, I will mention him, because the first person I think I reached out to practically was Tom Henry. And he's been on some of my shows, and he was very supportive. We had a very good conversation about the topic like we're having now, and he supports it and said he'd help find a building and possibly some funding. So right now we're just still generating interest, awareness. We're trying to raise some money to bring Lauren Chapin, you know who she is, from Father Knows Best. I don't think you're old enough, but I am.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm trying to be very, very diplomatic here, you know.
Well, I'll admit
I'll say neither one of you are old enough. Heck, I'm not either. Let's just make it
We've heard about it.
Okay,
we've heard it. And the reruns.
Reruns, we've heard about it. But I believe the rumor is...
It's on Antenna TV.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, she was a childhood star. She was called in on the show. She called in to Patty's page, Patty Hunter's show from Florida, and said, hey, I'd really like to be part of this. I'll come and speak. And she's a nationally known speaker, and she was abused growing up. So that's her stimulus for wanting to help people. So that will be our next event. We've put in a grant to Arts United, and we're trying to raise some money for her speaking fee. And then we hope and think that that awareness, along with a mural being painted, that John got permission from the library here to paint it in the Great Hall, and that will kind of be the springboard to maybe getting a building or somewhere to actually locate to do these shows and classes.
You know, when you talk about, you mentioned where can the kids go. I used to be a paramedic, and we would be called to a child who had fallen down steps, not a step in the house, but
Yeah.
And we were trained that we didn't make any accusations. We didn't even look at the parents with a look, because they could tell us to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to. And then the child would probably get it all over again. But what was so heart-wrenching was we would go there and hear this kid, obviously physically abused, but usually the mental goes right along with it, and they'd cling to the parent who abused them because this was their dad, and they had, this was daddy, I got to be with daddy, and they develop the mentation of, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this, or I was a bad boy, or I was a bad girl, because of what they hear day in and day out and day in.
And the guilt. I mean, I've just grown up with guilt, the terrible guilt. My mother took her life at a pretty young age, 41, I think. And, you're a young boy growing up, and, you're told you're terrible, and I'm so unhappy, and it's all your fault. And in her case, she started out as a very loving mother. So I had that experience, and then suddenly she's the devil, and so it must be my fault. So whatever the circumstance, the point is that is really good and sad at the same time. Good in the sense of you're shedding light, but sad that it's true. That a kid is kicked down the steps by a dad, and who's the kid turned to? The dad who did it, to try to please him, that, I'll be good next time, I won't do it. And also your point that you go in there, and as a trained professional, generally I'm sure you could take one look and see, I fell down the steps. But as you say, if you can't accuse them of that, because they can just slam the door, then the child suffers more, because they're not going to get to the hospital or get treatment. So in terms of reporting, it's difficult for reasons like that, I'm sure. And I think one of the differences with track, people are always asking, and John, you might have some ideas, and you not knowing as much, but how this would be different from other organizations that work with kids. And I think the fact that the kids are going to come to us, I mean, they're not going to wait for a call for the paramedic to come. We hope that the next time after the paramedic, they'll know about track, and they'll come and say, well, I can take an art class, and then we'll have a Linda Hartley, who is on the Malaya Heck show with Malaya, a therapist, tell them, hey, it's not your fault, you're a child. It cannot be your fault. I mean, not that children are perfect, but you take a child versus a grown adult male or female, there's no chance. I mean, physically, emotionally, mentally, they can't compete or defend themselves.
I think that's a good point. We hasten to move children into adulthood in our society. We rush it. We rush it in a lot of ways, educationally and socially, and even our criminal courts rush that. We try way too many kids as adults when they shouldn't be, and too many kids throughout the United States, not necessarily in Indiana, but throughout the United States, make it into adult jails. And I believe that kids deserve a childhood. They need time to play, and they need time to explore, and they need places to do that in a non-threatening environment. And I think that's the concept that we're working on at this point.
Yeah, that's good, non-threatening. I mean, where you can just be a kid, and we talk about art classes. The idea isn't to turn you into Picasso, but if that happens, great. But as John said, it's a window to the soul. I mean, it makes you feel good. A simple piece of art. It's your creation, and the person working with you is not going to be judging you and saying, oh my God, color in the lines, or whatever stupid thing that adults can come up with to really crush the spirit of kids. Boy, you're right. Kids grow up. It's partly the technology. My daughter's in the 7th grade. I mean, she studies things that I would never even heard of in the 7th grade when I was in the 7th grade. And part of it is, growing up in the 50s, that there wasn't all this technology. And there wasn't the danger. I mean, I could go out and play. Of course, I was a male, but girls went out and played too, down to the park, and you play all day, and nobody was saying, oh, you can't go out, it's dangerous, don't ride your bike there. And it's a different world. And I think that stress contributes to child abuse too, from parents' point of view as well. And most child abuse, I think, is done by people that know the child versus strangers. Not that strangers don't, but we're talking mostly here about like the cases you saw, going into homes and seeing these horrible conditions or situations.
Well, the art also allows them to express their feelings too sometimes. The things they draw, that's the only way they have to let out the anger or the fear, or, I mean, how many times do people find out what's going on in the home by what the child is drawing?
It's true. Good point.
So even though they're allowed to have that freedom to express themselves, it can be a really good therapy for that child also. So what a wonderful idea.
Well, I think it's more than therapy. And it isn't a limited concept, because I believe that art includes dance and music and all the wonderful plastic arts, which might include woodworking, for example, which is not generally thought of, or cooking, or jewelry making.
Something to allow them to be expressing creativity.
Exactly. And so art is defined not narrowly but broadly, woodworking or.
We have so many people in the community who could get involved, who could share their special talent in this way. We think, you have to be a professional to do this. Sometimes the best folks out there are very, very well educated or trained amateurs.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I mean, I think this idea really started with me way back. The other time I was on your show, I was talking about the folk school I started. And the folk school really was exactly what John said. Anyone with an idea, with an interest, with some passion, you didn't have to have a degree, you didn't have to have a teaching certificate, you just had to have an interest and want to share it. And that's what track is all about. It's kind of a meeting place. And it really is for the community generated. And not just for kids, because kids need adult training and teaching and learning and nurturing, but they need it obviously in a positive way. And I think conversation is an art. Drawing a child out to talk. I mean, a lot of the kids that you saw that we're talking about, they're terrified to tell because they feel like it's their fault. Mm-hmm. I didn't have anybody to talk to. If I'd had somewhere to go to talk to, for adults to say, hey, it's not your fault, or your mother's ill. After the fact, everybody says, oh, your mother's ill. Well, it would have helped me a lot to have heard that when I was experiencing the abuse, to have some perspective other than I'm just a rotten person,
Because a child wouldn't understand that. that she's ill.
Right.
It's my fault.
Yeah, that's another good point. That's a difficult concept for a 9-year-old child to understand illness. Well, if she's ill, why isn't she in bed? Or, you know, I mean, and back then, illness, you didn't talk about mental illness. It's still a taboo. I mean, it's still a powerful stigma. It's not that we've progressed that much, but there are therapists and, you know, mental health centers and that weren't there then, but still, it's not a pleasant topic. I mean, like those kids that come up to Malaya and say, who can I go talk to? And there's still a need, and a need that is simple to address. Simple in the sense that not a lot of paperwork you have to fill out or make appointments. I mean, you know, that's why we want track, why it's important, why it can work. And I love this emphasis on community, that the whole community can be involved. Community driven, kids and adults, driving ideas, the classes, what do you want, what works, what did you like, what would you like to study? You know, we're not talking about people making, you know, lifetime commitments. I know everybody's busy, and this will only work if people, the majority of it is volunteer. But, you know, I'm thinking like maybe an hour a week for 10 weeks. So you can see as a teacher, well, I like it, I'll do it another 10 weeks. That way you're not committed to something that is, you know, you find out you can't make that kind of time, or it just isn't what you like to do, or, you know. So, but again, John's point of the entire community, that's the key, I think.
And mainly to kill the loneliness and the isolation, because that's really the effect. I mean, yeah, there's physical damage and so forth, but it's the isolation and loneliness that a lot of these kids feel that is pervasive. You know, how do you get rid of that?
And that loneliness, you grow up thinking, I'm the only one. For a long time, I was so full of self-pity and, oh, I'm the only kid that his mother, you know, abused this way. And it turns out you're not alone at all. And I think right there is a powerful message and a powerful mission for track, just to make people feel, hey, I'm not the only one. Because when you think you're the only one, then there really is something wrong with you, because all these other kids aren't getting yelled at and called names and all, you know. Right. So it's got to be me, yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of our show here. And what I can say to the audience is, keep us in mind. We'll be doing more public access shows, and we'll be doing more things to put track out in the community. So just kind of remember that track is out there and that we want to do great things for abused kids in our community and do it with art.
And you can see the shows on Facebook. We have a page, the Three Rivers Art Center for Kids /Facebook. And you can see the dance, the song, the discussions.
Thank you, Terry, for being here. Thank you, Randy. I'm John Dickmeyer, and this has been Potpourri.